Welcome to New Home Insights, the podcast from John Burns Research Consulting. I'm your host, Dean Worley. If you want to follow market trends, demographics, capital, new ideas, and endeavors that touch on housing, we're going to try to make sense of that every couple of weeks. Let's go. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the New Home Insights podcast. I'm your host, Dean Worley. We have something a bit different today from the usual fare. We're going to be a little more wide-ranging than usual, I think, today. We're going to talk not just about housing, we'll get to housing, but we're talking about the economy and kind of financial literacy and stocks and economic policies and things like that as well. We're going to do that with someone whose presence is mostly known through social media platforms, and that person is Kyla Scanlon. Kyla, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm well. I'm doing well. Thanks for asking.
I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're doing well. Okay, you're not a social media influencer. You are a social media educator.
Yes,
correct.
I
saw that.
I prefer. Yes.
But really you're also a content creator. You're a podcaster. You're a writer. Your content focuses on financial literacy and then the economics, I guess economic questions more generally. And it's very wide ranging, by the way. I'm going to applaud you on that. You're very, very, very well read. I mean, everything.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
Anything to do with the economy and finance, you're talking about it a lot. And I don't want to unfairly pigeonhole you, but you're mainly talking to a Gen Z, a relatively younger audience. Is that fair to say? Am I being unfair?
I mean, the statistics of my audience are like 25 to 40-ish. Okay. So a little bit older, but yeah, a lot of Gen Z tunes in as well.
Did you just say 25 to 40 is a little bit older? That's it's painful. So
older. Well, I guess, Gen Z, I'm technically Gen Z and I'm 26, right? So I think it's just, hopefully everybody everywhere, tunes into the content.
And I love it. I'm a fan now. I've rated, subscribed. I haven't reviewed yet. I'll get to that, I promise. But you have a huge following on YouTube. You're on Instagram. You're on TikTok. And you're also on the other brand new social media platform that just arose between when we're recording this now and when it gets uploaded. Because I'm assuming that's going to happen here any day now. I'm thinking, I'm kidding. I'm joking.
I was like, oh my gosh, there's another one.
Things change.
Oh man, because when X, the thing with Twitter, yes. Being on Threads and then Blue Sky and then Mastodon, I was like, is there really another one? Okay,
Threads came and went pretty quick, didn't it? It seems like.
I think people are trying to go back to it now.
Are they? Okay. So I was covering my base. My bases there. Who knows when people are listening to this? If they listen to a year from now, there probably is a new social media platform that everybody's on.
Yeah.
So let's get started with what you do.
Sure.
First, you have a company, we'll talk in a minute, called Bread. But let's start with how did you get started just thinking, okay, every day, I'm going to talk about the economy or finance with it pitching toward folks that are my age. How did that what's the germination of that?
Yeah, I had this blog all throughout college called Scanlon on Stocks, where I talked about my options trading journey. And then I started tutoring econ when I was in college too. Moved out to LA, worked for an asset manager, and then just sort of realized that financial education was super important to me and wanted other people to tune into the economy. And then I left that asset manager, and around that same time, GameStop started happening. And all my friends were texting me and like, Kyla, what is this? Like, what's going on? So I started making TikToks about it. And it just sort of took off from there because following GameStop, a bunch of weird stuff happened. It's just kind of been really weird since then. So yeah, that's kind of how.
So it was really that organic. It was folks saying, I don't understand this. I think you probably do. Tell me. Yeah. And it just grew from there.
Yeah, I've always been like that annoying friend that talked about stocks at the dinner table. So they were like, be annoying online now. And so I just went and did that. Yeah.
But it kind of grew into what I think you've called financial literacy. Folks, a lot of folks of every generation, let's be honest, but a lot of folks of younger generation don't really fully understand finance. So do you focus a lot on just making sure those people understand core fundamentals about finance?
Yeah, my whole theory with the work is, there's two goals, right? So number one is there's a cognitive dissonance that happens when people feel like they're not tuned in to the system that they exist in. So a lot of people, when they hear that the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates, that is meaningless to them. Like they don't really understand what that means. And I feel like if you actually help people understand, like this is what it means when the Fed raises interest rates and this is how it impacts you and this is what you can do, that's going to create a better decision-making tree for those people as well. And then the second idea is that people need some sort of economics education, and it isn't necessarily provided, right? Something that's kind of left out of the curricula if you're not in econ in college. And so that's the goal, is just to help people make better decisions by giving them access to a toolkit.
Do you find, I mean, how wide ranging is that? Is it other people? Is it mostly your audience to the degree you know the answer to this question? Is it folks who are already somewhat, at least borderline interested in finance or economics? Or is it folks coming to you that just start as a kind of blank slate? They have no idea.
I mean, I'd say my content tends to be like a little bit more technical. So it tends to be those sorts of people who kind of already know a little bit. But I was out walking my dog the other day, and this woman came up to me and she was like, "Oh, wait, do you do TikTok?" And I was like, "Yeah," because I get recognized sometimes. Like, it's really neat. But she was like way outside of my demographic, like that I normally deal with. I think she was in her 70s, and she was like, I've spent 40 years trying to understand the economy, and you're the only person that has helped me make sense of it." And so there's people like that too that have, they just need little nudges in the right direction, and then they go and learn on their own or whatever. So I'd say it's a little bit of both, yeah, which is neat. I'm really happy to be able to do that.
Well, let's talk about bread in 1 second, but one more question. How do you find the discipline and the drive, the energy to do this? Literally, I mean, you're literally posting something almost every single day.
And
How?
writing a book too.
And writing, that's right. That's right. Well,
Yeah.
you know what? Let's do that now, by the way. I have that on my notes here. You're writing a book right now. It's going to be published by, I believe, Random House.
Penguin Random House, yeah.
And that's called?
It's called In This Economy, yeah.
And that's coming out next year, I think?
April 2024, yeah. We just decided on the cover. Awesome. And I have it back from copy to make final edits. I have about 2 weeks to edit the whole thing, which is really fast.
And it covers, I think you have sort of discrete chapters. So but do you have sort of an overarching, is this an overarching sense, an overarching message that you want to convey as the, kind of the sum of the whole?
Yeah, I mean, it's really like meant to be a non-biased guide to the economy. So talking about inflation, talking about the labor market, talking about the Federal Reserve, everything that I talk about in my videos, but something that you can sort of like refer back to a little bit easier and use in a classroom setting if you choose. So the book is just this guide to the economy. At the final 3 chapters, I kind of go off the rails and, give my opinion on public policy, but and others' opinions as well, right? So it's a melting pot. But yeah, how do we improve the current state of affairs?
Okay. Mm-hmm. I'll look for that next April 2024. I'll have to get it on ebook because I haven't read a physical book in like literally 15 years. Tell us about bread.
Yeah, so bread is kind of funny. Like when I first started doing content, 2 years ago as of September, which is crazy, I was like, I want to do like a Duolingo, but for finance. Like I really think financial education software would be really pertinent to build. Bread has not become a financial education software because software is so difficult to build. And I'm a team of one still, sort of.
Oh, God.
So yeah, like Bread is just the media house that houses all the content that I do and, the companies that I work with and am able to work with. Yeah.
So when you're working with a company, just tease that out just a little bit. What are you helping them with?
I mean, it depends. Like I'll teach people, like I'll go into institutions and teach about crypto. Like I'll help people edit videos. I'll create videos for people. I mean, the main thing that I try to brand myself as is an explainer. So if you like need something complicated to explain, like payment for order flow or monetary policy and the mechanics of quantitative easing, I hope to be the person that people are like, yeah, Kyla seems like she explains stuff in an accessible way with her whiteboard also. So yeah, that's kind of what I try to do for the brands.
Okay, let's go. I promised you, let's talk mostly about substance. So what I wanted to first talk about was vibe session. You have written and podcasted about a vibe session lately that particularly, I love that word, by the way, that particularly is sort of this idea that a lot of folks feel worse about the economy than those top line measures and metrics of the economy actually indicate. Can you just tell us about your concept of the vibe session?
Yeah, so the vibe session came to fruition in June of 2022, and it was really when people were feeling bad, like things were bad, but the economy was recovering, like we were starting to see inflation go down, the labor market was still stable, the Federal Reserve was sort of like, okay, maybe we're gonna chill out soonish, but people were feeling really, really bad. Like if you looked at sentiment metrics or if you looked at anecdotes, no one was feeling that good. And so the vibe session is, this idea that there's a gap between sentiment and the underlying economic economic data that the vibes are bad, but the economy is fine.
How much of this do you think is sort of is generational? How much do you think of this is there a media impact from this? In other words, what folks see in the media? Because remember, most folks about the economy are just seeing things at a very superficial level. And I'm not. That's
Yeah.
not because I'm not condemning their intelligence, just because that's not their world. That's not the center of their universe. They don't care about it that much. But so they see it at a relatively superficial level, and they don't, and so that media can really impact how they feel about the economy, regardless of how the economy is actually performing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like media sentiment has trended negative, like real negative, because headlines are ads, right? So you want people to click, you want the clickability. So I think that is a big part of it. But I also think, and this is something I wrote a follow up to the Vibe Session piece. There is hard economic data that points to things being kind of sucky for people. Like real wages have been stagnant, student loan payments are starting back up. We're seeing all this labor market movement
Yeah.
with auto strikes, with the writer strikes, where workers are like, oh my gosh, like things have kind of not been great, and we need you to recognize that for us. And so I think the vibes were off for valid reasons, but the vibes
Mm-hmm.
were also exacerbated, as you said, by media, by maybe a misunderstanding of what's actually going on. And then also, like, this is something I've only explored kind of recently. Like, the American mindset is very individualistic and very perfectionist, right? And so, if you don't have this perfect world, like, it's really difficult to get a house. A lot of people
Yeah.
feel stuck in their jobs, and that's going to, of course, impact how you feel about the overall economy as well.
Yeah. And it does probably impact younger cohorts more so because, by definition, usually they are at the beginning of their income ladder, their
Yeah.
earnings ladder, let's say. And I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think these stagnant wages are most impacting folks in those income brackets that are middle class and lower middle class.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, so actually, for the first time ever, lower income workers saw their wages increase, actually, more so than the higher income consumers. And part of that reason was because we had a recession in tech and a recession in
Yeah.
finance, right? But like in healthcare and other jobs like that,
Yeah.
like booming, absolutely
I see.
stellar. But in terms of, the generational discrepancies, I think that when I first joined the workforce, 6 months later, COVID happened, right? And so when that happens, your whole world is turned upside down. So I think for younger people, not only have they had a tough shake with the pandemic, but also they have had a tough shake with the labor market and just the
Yeah.
bumpiness of maybe whatever direction that they wanted to go, whether it be tech or finance, not hiring when they were trying to get a job.
And you do talk about sort of this folks are very individual focused. I mean, if people focus more, I mean, how are you going to get people to say, stop thinking so much about yourself, think about the community? Is that possible
Yeah.
in the US at least?
I don't know. There's this thing called the little favor economy that I really like. And it's this idea that like nobody really goes and asks their neighbor for a cup of sugar anymore. You don't really go and
Yeah.
ask for an egg. Like we don't have these little favors going along.
Yeah.
Like you could text your friend and be like, hey, I need this was a video I actually saw on TikTok, like this girl talking about this. And she was like, you could text your friend and ask for a camping bed, but like you would worry about that. You'd be like, I'm asking too much. And then you just go buy a camping bed instead. So like
Huh.
there's, the little favor economy, it has flatlined partially because of consumerism, whatever. But I also think
Yeah.
that we're just sort of afraid to lean on an overarching community, partially
Yeah.
because it's not baked into society as we know it.
In terms of real estate, though, I know you've talked about also that this does kind of play into real estate as well. Tell me if I understand your idea right. That a lot of folks are struggling economically. Again, we have more stagnant real wages and things are a little worse on the ground than maybe some of the top line metrics indicate. And does this explain to you that housing and flippers and housing investment, which seems relatively doable to a lot of folks of relatively modest means, is that part of why we have so many flippers out there, and not just on bad cable TV shows, but a lot of people out there trying to get rich through housing, which seems
Oh yeah.
weird if you think about it.
Yeah, so I love this. There's a chart from the Federal Reserve, and it's one of my favorite charts because it shows the breakdown of wealth across the percentiles, right? So, like the top 1%, all of their wealth is in businesses and equity ownership, top 10%, same situation. But the bottom 50%, all of their wealth is in their home. And so, I think a lot of people who are trying to climb that ladder to wealth don't see business ownership or stock ownership as a natural
Yeah.
path. Although, if you look at who's doing it well, clearly it is, they see homeownership as the natural path because homes
Okay.
always go up in price, it seems, but until they don't. And so I think that's the thing with like flippers. And I know so many people who flipped houses during COVID, and it's to make an easy $100,000 in the short run. It's very short term focused. Yeah.
It is very short-term focused, but it also, not everyone could do that. And it seems like for a while there, everyone
Not
was
everyone
doing
should
that.
do it. Yeah.
Or
A
should
bunch
do,
of
yeah.
houses are
Okay.
terribly flipped. Like I keep on talking about TikTok. I don't watch TikTok that much, I guess, but there's these home inspectors that'll show flipped houses and like how everything is built
Oh,
really bad. And then of
really?
course, we have a housing crisis. And so you have people who are like, I really just want a house and I want a yard and I want to
Yeah.
have a place where my baby can lay out in
Yeah.
the sun.
Yeah.
And they'll buy these flipped homes and yeah, it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
You
If
know
you know
this.
what you're
You know all
doing,
this. Yeah.
I do. But if you know what you're doing in that, I think you're a net positive because you're making more habitable houses for people. I think that's fantastic. If you don't know what you're doing, or if you're taking shortcuts, you're hurting folks. So there's another thing you've been writing about and talking about on YouTube, which is called doomerism.
There's a narrative that people want to see in the world. And a lot of times it's like the downfall of the world. And so they'll perpetuate that narrative, like have a paid subscription newsletter business where they are like, you better subscribe to save yourself from the end of the world, buddies. And so everybody goes and subscribes. And it's just like, it's super toxic, but it's very profitable for a numerous amount of reasons. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are these the people hoarding gold in a cave with a lot of meals ready to eat kind of a thing? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, there's also this idea that if you're not portraying anxiety about the world, it shows that you don't care about the world. And so I think there's a mix of doomerism where people are like, well, I kind of have to feel bad because if I don't feel bad, then it doesn't seem like I care about what's going on. But then there's the more extreme version of doomerism, which is like the guys who buy canned dog food and they're like, I'm going to live on this in my cave in Bermuda and I'll be fine.
Wait, dog food?
You
Did you say
I
dog
mean,
food?
yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
real?
Some of them
Serious?
buy dog food. Yeah. Because it's a
Oh.
good calorie ratio, apparently.
Okay. I'm now more scared of those people, but okay. How do we, or is it possible to sort of change that, a vibe session thing or doomerism thing? Is there a way to change that? Do you want to change that? When you're talking, are you trying to kind of erode that a bit?
Yeah. I mean, like when I wrote the vibe session piece, I got death threats
Did
because
you really?
yeah, because I was out there saying, and some of it was valid, but none of it really was valid.
Yeah.
I was like, hey, things are okay. You just feel kind of bad, and that's just not a great thing to hear, especially if you're not happy with your economic circumstances, a lot of which is outside of your personal control. And so I think that it's really important to shift the vibes, to shift perception, right? Because inflation expectations are a large driver of realized inflation, of actual inflation. And what people end up feeling ends up being how they act. Like if everyone's like, oh, dang it, I can't go get a job, I'm going to stop applying, right? Like, then job applications will decline. And then we have a situation in the labor market that we have to address. And so I do think it's important to address the vibes. How we do that, I don't know. I wish I knew.
The how part's the tough part. And I'm probably being unfair. There's a lot of pain out there, and there's a lot of frustration with the economy because it's not just that. Because we have a lot of jobs, unemployment is very, very low, but there's tons of folks out there who don't have the job that they want to have.
Yeah,
and that's extremely frustrating.
Yeah, and like it's tough because there's an element of truth to all of it, right? Like I took an Uber home from the airport and my Uber driver was telling me he worked in tech and then he's been unable to get a job since he was let go from his current firm. And so there's a lot of stories like that where people are just kind of stuck and they don't know how to go forward. And it's important to recognize those stories when you talk about the broader economy because people are the economy. And I think we oftentimes forget that.
You've also talked about this a little bit related. Tell me if I'm wrong. You've talked about Gen Z and how Gen Z has just a little bit different motivations and a little bit different outlook on work to older cohorts. What do you mean by that? And then I'm gonna ask the follow up is going to be how do we meet in the middle for that? But go ahead, tell me what you mean by that argument.
Yeah. I wrote this article for Fast Company talking about Gen Z and the future of work, and in the article, I was just talking about work. It's kind of backwards, right? Like chicken and the egg. So work has lost a lot of the promise for the younger cohort. You can't really go work for the same firm for 40 years and get a pension, and you can't afford that a lot of stuff on the 9 to 5 salary, like how you used to be able to afford. And so you see the younger generations, beginning with millennials, sort of begin to pull back, do side hustles, figure out their passions, and go off and create their own jobs, right? And so I think that's what we see with Gen Z is it's really important that they do work that they care about. In terms of how employers meet them in the middle, you got to give them work that they care about or give them
Yeah.
opportunities to explore passions on the side.
So, I mean, I'm glad you said that. So something they feel invested in, something they feel passionate about. That's not. Let's be honest, though. A lot of us don't have jobs that were never our dream job. That's common throughout the economy. So is there also the potential to motivate those folks, the Gen Z, through profit sharing, ownership,
Yeah.
just money, things? I mean, those classic things, if that's the right word.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I get stuck with my own thesis, which probably isn't great. But and I'll get to the ownership point because I think it's super important. But like there is a passion crisis going on. And it's not necessarily that people aren't working jobs that they're passionate about. It's like people don't know what they're passionate about. And a lot of that comes to like the education system and standardized testing, et cetera, and blah, blah, blah. But in terms of motivation, yeah, I think ownership is huge. So like when I was talking about stocks and businesses being part of the top 10%, the only way that you're going to do that is if you own a business and you get some stocks. And so I'm a huge fan of the idea of ESOPs, so employee stock option programs, like how Starbucks has, as a way for people to benefit in the upside of the corporation that they're working for. And then, of course, how do we give more people access to the stock market, whether that be through a centralized investing app or some alternate tool, I think is really important to get a handle on.
I mean, if you think about it, there's no better way to make people feel invested than to have them be actual investors in your company, even if it's on a very small scale.
Yeah, totally. And it seems like um, nobody wants to do that. Well, which makes sense. Like
No,
equity is expensive, but
I, it,
yeah, I think that like that would be just so ideal because all the tech companies do it, and then you got people who stay there because of the equity, right?
yeah, they
Yeah.
stayed it because of the equity, but they also unfortunately go and sleep in a van for 6 hours at the far side of the parking lot too, because they're working 18 hours a day. So there's I mean, you've written about how is it fair to say Gen Z doesn't want to work 60, 70 hours a week. They have other passions in life and they want to, be able to that classic work life balance actually means something to them.
Yeah, yeah, and like people get kind of mad when we talk about Gen Z and work. They're like, oh, they're just whining. But I do think like the promise of traditional corporation has dissipated. Like the 9 to 5 salary is not what it used to be for anybody
Yeah.
in any age group. And so I think for Gen Z, they're looking at this. They're looking at what happened to millennials, where millennials are stuck in the hamster wheel to a certain extent, and they're like, I
Yeah.
don't think that is the way that I want to do it, so they reinvent the hamster wheel. So they're
Yeah. See, and that's I don't know. There has to be some kind of an agreement, some kind of a consensus eventually. Because I mean, I want to be fair. Companies have to make money, and companies need people to work hard for them, and to work when they're supposed to be working. But at the same time, the expectations are probably going to have to change from what they were in decades past.
yeah, and I think that we're starting to see that begin to happen in the labor market movement. So the auto workers being like, dude, like just pay us a little bit more. Your
Yeah.
GM CEO made 300% more money because the company made more money. I think profit sharing is really important. So companies do exist to make money, but I do think it's important. The other thing, this is a tough one. Talking about the auto worker strikes, there's I think a FT article that was like shareholders are okay with them paying the workers a little bit more, so the companies don't have to do as many buybacks. Or the shareholders are okay with the companies not doing as many buybacks, so they can pay the workers a little bit more. And it's like where,
Okay.
like why is this? Why is this being compared, right? Like, why are buybacks taking
Oh,
precedent over us not paying people maybe enough
yeah.
money to live on? And so I think that's the other thing too, is the stock market just really can be blinding to CEOs because they have to respond to it. Like, if your stock is not doing good, that's not great for you in your job. And so it's all sorts of incentives and
Okay.
misalignments going on.
Let's talk about housing. Can we switch to housing now?
Sure. Yeah, totally.
So you've talked and you've written and you've spoken about interest rates and mortgage rates and about supply and housing and how critical supply is in the equation of the housing market right now. I mean, the lack of supply is the main buttress of certainly the new home market right now. And even the resale market in maintaining prices have actually been going up this year in the face of extraordinarily high compared to recent years mortgage rates. I'm going to ask you, what do you see mortgage rates happening to mortgage rates, and how do especially younger households feel about? Is it just such a hurdle right now they just can't imagine owning a home right now because of prices and mortgage rates?
Yeah, I mean, mortgage rates have skyrocketed, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're locked in at 2%, you're golden. And people who got in during that time they're locked in, whether or not they want to be, right?
Yeah.
And so I think for the current generation, not only are home prices really high, but also you have these really high mortgage rates. And so I think a lot of people do feel that frustration. And this also gets into the conversation about ownership too, because when you're a homeowner, you get tax breaks and you get equity, right? And so I think there's a conversation that could be had about how do we make it so renters get some sort of tax break or get some sort of equity in the property that they're renting too. So it might not just be like, how do we fix the housing market, but how do we fix the rental market alongside of it?
In terms of back for the for sale part of it, though, you've talked about the golden handcuffs, right? The people at 2% or
Mm-hmm.
3, or more like a 3%, 3.5% mortgage rates. Those people aren't going to free up. That house is not going to free up anytime soon. Keeping inventory down. How do we increase supply? You've had some thoughts about that in some of your past posts, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, it's just well, it's not just, but reforming zoning, I think, is a big part of it. Just being able to build more homes is part of the issue. And there's such strict zoning laws in so many areas. Like Minneapolis has done, I think, a good job at reforming their zoning, have built up a bunch of new housing, have subsidized certain parts of that as well. So a lot of it is just like making sure that policy is in place that enables new homes to be built. Yeah, which as well. Yeah.
A big part of the COVID reaction was, of course, folks moving out from their kind of city center kind of location out to the suburbs or the exurbs, or even in some cases, completely out of their MSA or completely out of the region entirely. A lot of those Bay Area tech folks who were living in Phoenix or Boise or Salt Lake City or something like that. Mostly they went to Sacramento or someplace, but a lot of them even went to whatever, Austin. So as we see the big employers start to claw back those folks or start to desire to claw back those folks in the office, I mean, could you see that exacerbating home prices and especially closer in urban areas?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's forced selling going on in those areas now. Like Denver, Colorado, which is a very hot housing market, has been a little cool, partially because people are kind of leaving, right? And so I think you're
Yeah.
going to see that in those areas, cooling off. And then, of course, like New York rent has skyrocketed, partially because people have to be back in the office. And so I think
Mhm.
that's just a trend. And it's kind of sad. Like, it's so expensive to live in those really big
Yeah.
cities,
Yeah.
and it makes it really difficult for young people. Yeah. And
I mean, they
anybody.
were able to go live in that suburb and get 3 times the house for half the price, literally. And
Yeah.
so, to the extent those folks are supposed to sell back and move closer in, I don't know. We'll see. Who do you think is going to win that arm? It's going to be an arm wrestle between essentially employees and employers. Right now, it seems to be pretty close. The employees have held out, I think, longer than some of these employers thought they would. Do you see that continuing, or do you see that if the economy slows down, do you see that
Mhm.
leverage just sort of crumble for the employees?
Yeah. I mean, like if the economy crumbles and your job is on the line, you're probably going to go back into
Yeah.
the office.
Yeah.
But I do think that I don't know. We kind of uncovered a lot of official, like even the fact that we're doing this podcast via Zoom or whatever this app
Yeah.
is, like that's really impressive. Like it's really impressive technology, and I think that there's a way to take advantage of it more. Like I know a lot of hybrid workplaces, but I think people worry about productivity, and also a lot of jobs are not necessarily about productivity, but about control, and just
Yeah.
like making sure you're doing your emails or whatever. And so I think
Yeah.
that's the big thing for the white collar group is going back, so that is reassured.
So I'm going to bring in something that you and I might disagree on. I think in the past you've talked about density and how density and increased densities are a potential solution to the supply, and of course they are. But and my thoughts are that a lot of folks don't want to live in relatively dense urban center environment. So how do we accommodate those housing preferences and environmental preferences versus, I'll totally acknowledge the need to have more dense urban higher to raise supply. How do we do that?
Mixed use residential zoning, I think, is a good step. So like having it be where there's like coffee shops and
Okay.
gyms in a certain area. Like I think the suburbanization has created a lot of issues in terms of sprawl, and I think that we could contain some of that by just moving certain parts of business closer to said
Okay.
suburbs. Yeah, I don't know if that quite answers, but
It does, and that will be key. You can have denser stuff there. I think I told you I live in more or less a suburb, and when you have things like a brewery and
mhm.
something a little more trendy, a little more fun, oh my God, they've been tremendously successful. I know
Sure,
that's been
yeah.
happening in other suburbs as well. We do need so much more of that. The problem is it's hard to retrofit into established environments, so you not kind of almost don't have to, but it's much easier to do on a blank slate.
Yeah.
And so you have to, and sort of like starting now, let's do that all the time. But that's going to take a while for those kind of environments to sort of catch up to the demand.
Yeah, and like that's the thing with everything is it always takes a while. But a while one day will be now. So I think
Yeah.
that's the important thing to remember is like sure we not might not see the benefit right away, but we got to at least try, right?
I know I completely agree. And to the degree you can do it and you can retrofit it to an existing suburbs, please do, because it's hugely, the problem is it takes rezoning and even
The zoning, yeah, it's
easements and things
insane.
like that though too, and all those
Hmm.
established landowners are just, they're going to fight it tooth and nail.
Oh, the NIMBYs, yeah, they're fighting
Yeah,
everything
not
all the
only the
time.
NIMBYs, but the folks like in this case, streets need to be widened, and that's going to some
Mm,
old businesses are going to have to go to do that. That's
man,
hard to do.
that's why you invest in public transit.
Public transit.
Right? Like, yeah. And
How about, okay, I want to talk about homeownership and specifically for Gen Z. We have a group here in my company called New Home Trends Institute. It's a part of John Burns Research and Consulting. And they do tons of like surveys and they keep their finger on the pulse of trends and things like that in housing. And they did a recent survey on desire to be a homeowner. And they cut it off by life stages, by demographic and by age cohorts. And about 2/3 of most of the older and middle-aged cohorts said, okay, yeah, it's really important to be down at home. But about 59% of the younger singles and couples said the same. So it's lower, but it's still pretty close. Do you still see that in that Gen Z generation? They still want to own a home. They're
yeah.
just, it's frustrating in getting there.
Yeah, I mean, I think home ownership, like, we talk about the American dream, like, that's a big part of it, having your own little spot to hang out. And it's a big wealth generation opportunity, too. So I think that's how people see it. It's like, not only is this a place where I can go and hang stuff on my wall without worrying that I'm not going to get my deposit back, but also it's a way for me to generate wealth for myself and my
Yeah.
family.
You've talked about that home ownership is kind of the key wealth generator and wealth
It is
escalator.
the wealth generator, yeah. Yeah, like, it creates issues around speculation, and I think part of the reason that we have this situation with housing, and NIMBYism that we kinda hit on is that people are like, "But my house has to go up in price, like, I have
Yeah.
to make money on this home. This is,
Yeah.
like, everything," and that creates all sorts of misaligned incentives. Mhm.
In fairness to the folks that we call NIMBYs, and I'm not a fan, is that to the degree they're concerned is, gosh, that might hurt my housing values. I get that. You
Totally.
have to get that.
Totally, yeah, and that's why, I don't like them either because sometimes I'm like, "Oh my gosh," but I do think that, like, there's a valid, thread in there where they're like, "I just want my house to be a bajillion dollars," and it's like, I get that, I'd want that too, honestly.
So, what is your advice for younger people toward eventually being a homeowner?
As I sit in my apartment, yeah, I mean, I think that it's all about saving money, and I've had friends who have purchased homes now and they're like, okay, I'll refinance when rates are lower, which is a gamble at this point perhaps, but I think that that's the thing is keeping an eye on the housing market, figuring out when a good time to get in would be. Like we are seeing a cooling in the housing market right now, but yeah, it's just tough with the Fed and what they've done with rates for fighting inflation. It's just made everything quite difficult.
Do you ever prognosticate about the Fed? Are they going to start lowering their interest rates in the near term?
They don't seem too intent on that path at the moment. I do think that they've realized that they've gone pretty quickly.
Okay.
They've raised rates so quickly and so fast. We haven't really even seen the whole impact yet. But I do
Yeah.
think, the rise in oil prices, they're concerned about that. And also the tool is not hitting in the way that it needs to. Like people are in the way that it's meant to as a monetary policy tool. Like
Yeah.
people are still spending money. The labor market is still doing mostly
Yeah.
fine. And so I think for them, they're kind of like, what do we do now? Like we just want inflation back down to 2%.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and like it becomes a worldwide mandate too. Like everybody's sort of targeting that number, and like PCE has averaged back down to 2%, which is the inflation metric that the Fed
Mm,
looks at, personal consumption
okay.
expenditures. So like we're making a lot of progress, but yeah, 2% is sort of arbitrary. And there's research papers that are like maybe 3% is okay, but then the question is like, what does happen to the labor market if inflation is
Yeah.
trending above? What happens to growth? How do we make sure that R and G and all these economic like things are balanced, right?
Yeah. I mean, everybody wants low inflation, and I don't disagree that low inflation. It's just maybe this super, super hyper intensive focus on such a low number. It could do more harm than good because, like you said, what they've been doing now may have already had enough effect, and it may have had enough effect 5 months ago, 6 months ago, and now they're going to go a little overboard. It's really, really difficult to time. It
Oh
seems like,
yeah.
but
I mean, it's like an impossible job,
yeah, it is.
right?
Let's be
Yeah.
fair. You're always fair to Jerome Powell, though, don't you? You do your Jerome Powell imitation on TikTok
Yeah.
every time the Fed meets. So when is that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they meet every 6 weeks ish. So I
Yeah.
every 6 weeks I wear my blazer and my glasses, and it's the goal is to explain the FOMC meeting because I think it's really important that people know what they're talking about, and the skit is kind of a fun way to do that. And I really like editing videos, and like I'll do fun editing and stuff. It's nice. I like it.
Back to housing for a second, then we'll end up with a few hot takes. Is that in terms of a lot of our listeners are going to be builders and people in the new home building sector. How
Mhm.
any advice for how they should use social media? I mean, they all have Instagram, right? They all have Facebook, things like that. Any advice in the sense of how they should interact with
Yeah.
relatively younger potential home buyers?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like for builders, it's always really interesting to see the behind the scenes. So I know some builders on TikTok who will film like what it looks like to build a house, like what it looks like to install plumbing, like all of the different parts
Mhm.
and things that you have to do in order to build this structure. And then I think realtors, talking about the housing market, giving people information. People just kind of want to learn. I think most of
Okay.
the time from those sorts of people. And so, yeah, that's the big thing is just like giving people either behind the scenes or giving them
Huh.
actionable insights. Yeah.
That's interesting. So be as much educational as you are
Well,
salesy, I guess. Is
I'm
that
biased. Yeah. Well, I mean,
you're
I think,
biased, but
yeah,
but but you would be a typical 26-year-old who might be looking at that. No one wants to be sold to,
no.
but a lot of people would love to learn about that world.
And there's a lot of resistance in younger generations to being sold to
Yeah.
because you're constant, like every time you turn around, there's an ad. And so I think like if you can just make yourself a human, people are gonna really like that. Like rather than just being like, buy my thing. It's like,
Yeah.
here's how my thing
Yeah.
looks. How do you think it looks?
Okay.
It's like opening up a conversation, like treating consumers as people rather than just consumers, right?
Yeah. Rather than targets or something like that. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. I like
KPIs.
that. Keep the
Yeah.
so let's do some hot takes, some hot topics. I was going to ask you a question about the government shutdown. We're in day whatever we would be day 5 or something like that of the government shutdown. We of course averted a government shutdown last week.
For this
Recording this, by
month.
the way,
Yeah.
or last month. Yeah, you're right. Late last month. We're recording this in the first week of October, by the way, for listeners. Uh, um, we though we do have the potential for a shutdown in another less than 6 weeks now, probably 5 weeks or so. There's going to have another vote. How do you see that playing out? And do you see that being something that would just really kick the economy's butt?
Yeah, I mean, it's not great that Speaker Kevin McCarthy was booted out of there, and that was unprecedented. And it's
Yeah.
mostly because nobody kind of knows what they want, it seems. And I do think that is concerning because he was, at the last minute, pretty instrumental to making sure that everything got across the finish line. Um,
Mm-hmm.
if the U.S. government does shut down, I'm worried that Moody's, which is one of the rating agencies, will say U.S. debt kind of don't touch it. It's
Yeah.
gross. It's bad. And I think that could be really, really detrimental to the economy.
Yeah. Do you think it would be that bad? Do you think it'd be, would it be just, I say just a lowering that could cost billions of dollars, or would it be something like don't
Yeah.
buy it at all?
No, I don't think it would be like it's still a very, very good, like the US debt's
Yeah,
still solid. But I
it's
do
the
think,
best.
yeah, but they're
Long-term
trying.
safe investment is the best, but when you do have these threats, it has to be damaging.
Yeah. And like the Treasury is trying to issue a bunch of new stuff right now. And so
Okay.
that could be harmful. It's like they're trying to do this and finance the government because you can either issue bonds or raise taxes, and only one of those is politically acceptable. And I think
Yeah.
that's the issue that we're going to run into is like, how do we finance the ever expanding deficit?
We're not going to end on a downer. I'm going to ask you a couple more questions. So, how about
Okay.
you also have talked about Chinese economic struggles? I mean,
Oh, sure.
and do you see that having an impact on the U.S. economy anytime in the near future?
Uh, no, I mean, so it's interesting, right? Like with industrial policy, is the U.S. is like we're bringing all manufacturing back here, like we're doing reshoring. That's a big part of the CHIPS IRA, IIGA, like all the fiscal policy that has just been passed by Bidenomics. So I don't necessarily think that the Chinese economy slowing down will be detrimental to the United States. And it'll be something to watch for because they are such big consumers. But I think because we're going into this weird phase of deglobalization, it's more insulated than it would have been, in my opinion. Yeah.
Do you see demographics as a saving grace? We're getting older. I mean, do you see growth in the those things that boomers are doing now? Like, I don't know, nursing homes or assisted care. I don't know. Is that a good thing to have a growth in that? But are those things that could actually bolster the economy?
Nursing homes are about to lose federal funding, and there's a
Oh,
huge labor shortage of workers in nursing homes, and Social
yeah.
Security is massively underfunded. Medicare, Medicaid, all that stuff. And so I'm not excited about the demographics because for every retiree, we need a worker
Yeah. Yeah.
support them. But we could talk about childcare costs too forever because childcare is about to lose funding.
And that could potentially take a productive member out of the labor pool because they'll have to be taking care of a child rather than that's dangerous. Okay, we have to find something fun. Cranes. We see lots of cranes. That's a
I
good
love
It's a good
cranes.
sign of growth. B,
Yeah.
you are fascinated and maybe even obsessed by
Yeah.
cranes. I mean, I'm saying that. Okay, I said that because I just watched your was it a YouTube? I can't remember or something. I mean, maybe it's TikTok, and I said that to my wife, and my son was there, and he goes, "Oh, cranes aren't the thing we should worry about. It's geese. Geese are dangerous. They'll go." And I
Oh.
go, "No, no, 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 not that
Yeah.
kind of crane, not the
Yeah.
bird." So you're fascinated by the cranes that actually help build
The
buildings and things like that.
mechanicals. Yeah. Yes, I try to take a picture of every crane that I see. People send me cranes that they run into. Yeah, I love them. I think I want to be up in one day. I think that'd be really cool, just like sitting in a crane. But they're also signs of economic activity, right? So I think it's
Yeah,
just neat
yeah,
to be in a city where there's like a bunch of cranes are around because that means a
yeah.
bunch of stuff is happening, right?
It does. It's good. There's newspapers and business journals will have things like crane watch and things like
Yeah,
that. It is.
exactly.
It's a
Yeah.
sign. Here's what's going on, and that's good. The more cranes
That's why I
out
love
there,
them.
the better. I'm with you. I'm gonna be a big fan of cranes now.
Yeah, they're cool
Okay,
too.
they are
All the
pretty
different
cool.
types.
I don't know if I want to be in one of them though. I don't know if I'm gonna. Yeah, maybe. I probably would. I've bungee jumped. I think I can do a crane.
Yeah,
I'll
if
bungee
somebody
jump
asked
off
you,
a
you'd do
crane.
it. Oh, that'd be cool.
So let's end with something hopefully more positive. What else besides Taylor Swift can bolster the economy?
Yeah,
You
geez.
talked about Taylor Swift having a literally Taylor Swift had a legit impact on, I think, the global economy, let alone the U.S. economy. Is
Easy.
that fair?
Yeah, I mean, she caused an earthquake in Seattle, so with all her fans stomping. So yeah, I mean,
Ah,
$5 billion is estimated for the global impact of her tour. So she's just her and Beyonce are just powerhouses, and she's also like reshaped the NFL, the National Football League in the United
yeah.
States, by dating one of the um,
Travis
quarterback.
Kelsey. She's made Travis Kelsey from a well-known football player
Oh,
to an
to a
international star among people
superstar.
who've never heard of football.
Yeah,
Yeah,
his the sales of his jerseys went up like 300%. So
yeah.
she's so fascinating because it's like brands will attach themselves to her. So she was eating chicken nuggets and she had a chicken nugget with a ketchup and a little bit of ranch, and the Empire State Building lit up in that honor for this chicken nugget, like red and white. And then also Heinz has now released ketchup with a
Oh
little
my
bit of
God.
ranch as a packaging product. And it's like her power is just like I don't know, it's wild, but she is an economic force within her own realm. Yeah, she's amazing.
So I don't want to end on something super negative. Other than Taylor Swift, I'm being serious here, Kyla. What else do you see sort of maybe bolstering some kind of trend that might be bolstering the economy near term?
I mean, I think that like the labor market is still relatively strong. I'm actually very curious to see what the ultimate impact of these strikes end up being. Like for the first, like strikes used to be the main way that employees interacted. Like during the early
Mhm.
1900s, that was kind of like what you did when you were like, I need to be paid more. You went on strike, and so I'm curious. Like I don't know if it'll bolster the economy, but I do think like long run impacts of perhaps more equal employee
Mhm.
employer relations might be beneficial in the long run. So like that's something I'm keeping an eye on is like what does that actually look like from a long run perspective, considering we haven't done strikes in a while.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what 70% almost of our economy is based on consumer spending. So folks have
Mhm.
more to spend. That can't be bad.
No.
Okay, let's go with that. Let's go with that as our anything else for positive? You can tell I'm fishing.
Oh, this is kind of what I want to say earlier. The unfortunate thing about the way that the economy is right now is like it's a could have been worse economy. So like things are
Mhm.
maybe not exactly where we want them to be, but it could have been worse, right? And like that's kind of the worst thing to say to somebody. It's like, oh, my sandwich falls on the ground, could have been worse, right? So like I think that, but that's an important thing to remember is like somehow we've managed to evade a recession thus far, which is incredible, really. Yeah,
I
even
think
though it
that's
doesn't
very
feel
fair.
great. Yeah.
Everybody pretty much thought we'd be in a recession right now, or maybe
Hmm.
later this year at the latest, or early next year at the
All
latest,
the
and it
banks
doesn't look
thought
like that's
that. Yeah.
happening. So,
Hmm.
so that's good.
Hmm.
I'd also say that because we tell me if you agree, the Fed has raised interest rates so high now. There's not a lot of room to bring those down and to gin up the economy if we do start slowing down. So they have that tool of theirs could be more efficacious than it would have been when they had rates very, very, very low, where they didn't have that tool to use during a slowdown.
Yeah, it's important that they did what they did.
Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. Kyla, I've loved listening to you on your podcast. It's called Let's Appreciate. I've seen you
Yeah,
on YouTube now. I'm not on TikTok. I'm not going to lie to you.
that's okay.
But my daughter is. So that's good. So thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This has been the New Home Insights podcast with Dean Worley. Thanks again. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.